What do you think of Media Watch, and is there still a place for it?
I think there's very much a place for Media Watch. I haven't always agreed with Media Watch, but there are times that we need to be kept honest.
Do you always agree with Media Watch?
I very seldom agree with Media Watch. I think sometimes they get it wrong. I think sometimes it's nitpicking to the nth degree, and sometimes it's just bile heaped upon bile. But they've had some coups, and I can't take that away from them, nor would I seek to.
Now, can you talk about how when Media Watch started, it was the first time that really journalists had been accountable in terms of being publicly exposed for doing bad things?
It wasn't the first occasion on which journalists on television had been kept accountable for their misdeeds. In fact, we had a program at Channel 9 hosted by John Laws way back in the 1970s called Press Watch, and we confined it in those days to newspapers. And it wasn't always appreciated by the newspapers, by News Limited in particular. But so Media Watch, yes, magnificent program, 20 years old, congratulations, but it wasn't the first such program.
Okay, well, I just learned something. Now, a former Media Watch EP, David Salter, he claims that the mid-90s was characterised by foot-in-the-door journalism, prejudice and intrusions. What do you think?
Whenever I hear David Salter's name, I cross myself. I think to try and categorise any decade as being representative of something is simplistic, nonsensical. Journalism is aggressive and should be aggressive. Sometimes it's too aggressive, sometimes journalists go too far, but I don't put it down to any one decade.
Now, a little more on Salter claim that they expose some of the technical tricks of the trade in terms of reverses and pieces to camera, and did you ever get a sense that they were exposing just the craft?
I don't think pieces to camera and reverses are necessarily anything insidious. I'd always prefer to shoot an interview with two cameras so the reverses are as they happen, but that's not always financially possible. That's not what I think they should get principal credit for.
Now, one of the classic Media Watch stories under Littlemore was where Nine News reporter Steve Barrett gave the impression he was a policeman, and telling the widow of a recently deceased man that he needed the photographs for general police release. Do journalists sometimes get too desperate for the story and forget their ethics?
Well, sometimes journalists go too far, but I'm not quite certain of the facts of the Barrett case. I think he might have said something like it was needed for police release and it would have been used for those purposes. Sometimes it's very hard to draw the line between Steve Barrett and a policeman.
But actually saying to a widow, we need these photographs for general police release, isn't that pretending to be a police officer?
Well, I don't know. I'm not exactly certain of what the verbatim conversation was. If the guy misrepresented himself as a police officer, that's a no-no. If he said, I'm getting these on behalf of the police, that's not necessarily anything odious.
Do you think, though, that sometimes journalists do, forget what's important with a story? Like there's Mr. Meakin, where they were really desperate to get those shots, but this poor bugger had just come out of the desert. Does sometimes desperation take over?
Sometimes journalists get overzealous. That's true. They got overzealous in that case. It was embarrassing. But because they get overzealous on one occasion doesn't mean to say they are constantly overzealous. Most of the time, journalists, cameramen, sound recorders act with considerable decorum and restraint. In fact, I'm proud of their conduct in most cases. But we get judged by our misdeeds, not by what we do right.
Stuart Littlemore says that he holds journalists in the lowest contempt. He said journalists would sell photographs of their mothers to get on front page.
Well, as in most things that Stuart says, I think that the principal target is to have a dramatic effect. Most journalists would not do that. However, some journalists are, extremely competitive and want to get a story at almost any cost. That's a good thing more than a bad thing.
Littlemore says show programs like that pick on the soft targets, people who can't fight back, people who aren't articulate and don't have resources.
Well, that is total nonsense. I mean, the targets of our nightly current affairs programs recently have included such giants as Woolworths, Coles, KFC. They do have the resources and they do fight back. So, I mean, the idea that we're only picking on little guys in suburban stores is just total nonsense.
Now to one program that's sort of received a lot of mentions on Media Watch over the years, the Paxton family.
Yep.
Were the Paxton family exploited by a current affair?
Were they exploited? That's an interesting question. They were certainly the stuff of many stories which rated extremely well. Was it a valid story? In my view, yes, it was. They personified, the argument of generational unemployment. They took the argument about unemployment and willingness to work beyond statistics. Yes, they weren't terribly well versed in handling the media, but I don't think there was any fabrication involved there. What are we saying? That journalism shouldn't deal with real people?
Dave Sluggo Richardson has been a sort of repeat offender, if you like, on Media Watch for many years. The latest was for ambushing a woman in a car park and asking how many kids she had. Is that good journalism?
I think sometimes you ask challenging questions. Sometimes they might be a little too challenging. But Sluggo is frequently accused and seldom guilty, in my view. I mean, he is a very, very great professional reporter. On a couple of occasions he might have wanted to revisit his conduct, but I like the guy and I have a great deal of respect for him.
Is Barcelona tonight one of those occasions where he should have perhaps thought about his conduct?
I mean, Barcelona doesn't appear in his CV.
What does that mean?
Well, I think he, given his time again, he might have used a different location.
Are journalists thin-skinned?
I think some journalists are exceptionally thin-skinned. I think print journalists more than television journalists, but for people who are very jealous of our rights to criticise others, we're sometimes very touchy when we get criticised ourselves, and I think that's wrong.
Just on that, there's a classic piece of footage, Ray Martin outside his house and with John Safran, and a bit of a scuffle happened. A lot of people have claimed that Ray Martin was a bit hypocritical reacting like that when he hosted a program that quite often did sort of foot in the door journalism. What's your view?
Yeah, I don't think it was Ray's finest hour. I can understand that he was feeling upset or invaded. So at a human level I can understand what happened, but I can also see the viewer's standpoint that if you're shining light on other people, you can hardly be precious when it's shone on you.
Well, one of the things we're looking at is the changing nature of the media landscape and how online media is affecting, say, for example, newspapers. There's a suggestion that Fairfax, for example, are running stories that they'd never run in their news pages that don't have the same rigour, that are a lot more sensational. I'm just wondering, from your point of view, from a television point of view, whether you're noticing a change. How is the new online media impacting on news and current affairs from your point of view?
I'm a bit of a dinosaur. Thus far, I don't think online has had much effect on television at all, nor should it have. We've got to produce what we know best. We can't be jumping at shadows. I think some newspapers have taken their eye off the ball. They're more consumed with their websites than they are with what they publish. And it's made the newspapers in some cases less readable, less powerful, and less resourced.
And in terms of free-to-air news and current affairs, can you see any changes in the future?
Well, the future means that we're going to have more and more competition online, more television networks, apart from radio and all the rest of it. So, an increasing amount of competition for people's eyeballs. But we have to stick with what we know best, and we've also got to concentrate on our efforts on getting material that is exclusive to us, that people can't see anywhere else.
Right. Just to Naomi Robson. What sort of presenter was Naomi Robson, and why do you think she became the target of so many Media Watch programs?
I don't know what Media Watch's motivation with Naomi Robson was. I suspect it's because she wasn't a former editor of the Melbourne Age or something that they could admire. However, she did have journalistic credentials. She was extremely professional. She was very good on camera, and she's a thoroughly decent human being. I think she was. They saw a good-looking woman and decided to disembowel her if they could.
One of the stories that they had a big swipe at her was her coverage of the Beaconsfield incident. What they were claiming is that she was putting herself, talking on camera about the trailer and the makeup, and forgetting sight that there were two men trapped in a mine.
Well, she wasn't talking about the trailer and the makeup and all the rest, but she didn't talk about that. The bit about the makeup trailer was just total fiction, and it became a legend, and it will no doubt go down in history as her great act of self-indulgence. It never happened. Yes, she used makeup. Lots of presenters, male and female, use makeup. But she didn't put herself ahead of the story. I'm saying the story was an invention by some newspapers, that she had a makeup truck and a small army of people who were tending to her every wish. Well, she was down there to cover the story. She wasn't alone in that. I mean, Mel and Koshy were down there, and Tracy Grimshaw, lots of people were down there, and I suspect most of them had makeup.
Now, Media Watch say that they have a go at the ABC. Do you think that they put as much energy into criticising their own products as they do, say, for example, a current affair in Today Tonight?
I think Media Watch is reasonably even-handed. I think they've caused grief within these hallowed halls as well as commercial television. I wouldn't accuse them of playing favourites. I think sometimes it's incredibly nitpicking. I mean, when they get the big ones, that's terrific. My biggest criticism of Media Watch is that it very seldom hands out compliments.
Now, just on that, Media Watch has been accused more recently of having a left-wing agenda and left-wing presenters, and that's often by more conservative elements. What's your view? Have you ever noticed a Media Watch presenter being a bit of an old lefty?
I think the ABC's been accused of being a haven for lefties since way back last century. As far as I'm concerned, it's a figment of some, right-wing coteries' imagination. The people here are no more left-wing than they are anywhere else.
Was it Media Watch's finest hour doing a story on a whale penis?
It wasn't its finest hour, but I think it's right up there. The fact that the resources of the ABC were brought to bear, and we were crucified for identifying this whale as possibly a mother, when in fact a penis was clearly visible on the carcass they found, was something I will go to my grave regretting.
Is that an example of Media Watch being a bit petty?
I think it was incredibly petty. It was very funny, but it was also petty. I mean, I don't know what a whale's penis looks like, but clearly I need to go back to ABC television school and learn about such things.
Do you think Media Watch makes any difference at all to the way that journalists conduct themselves out in the field?
I think some journalists behave with greater integrity because they don't want to be exposed as charlatans or crooks, yes.